Sports and life, there are two separate things. They're quite often intersect, and more often than not, more often than not, they interact more than people think. And my next guest does a masterful job intersecting life and sports in whatever she writes. Now, I reached out and I had to have her on my podcast. Welcome to the podcast, writer for Yahoo Sports, Shalise Manza Young.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad I was able to do this.
Well, I'm honored to have you on. And actually, I don't know if you remember, but I met you actually in Minneapolis for the Super Bowl. So.
Yeah, you did mention that. I that week is a bit of a blur, especially because I think the last day before I flew home, I was really, really sick. So I just remember lots of laps back and forth in the Mall of America.
Definitely. I mean, honestly, if you with that, if anybody knows that mall and seen that mall, yes, you can definitely get your exercise in walking that mall.
Yeah, and the Patriots were close-ish to the media workroom, but the Eagles were on like the far opposite side, and Radio Row was somewhere. Yeah, it was a lot. I was glad it was all inside, certainly, because it was freezing that week. But
Yes.
but yeah, it was. I'll be going to LA this year, so that's far better weather, especially because I'm based in Boston, and Boston the first week of February is brutal. So I'll be really glad to be in California for a week.
Definitely. California dreaming for sure. I gotta admit, I enjoy reading your work. I definitely do. I gotta ask though, how did you develop your style?
So right now I'm a columnist, and I can, that means I can write my opinion, and I can write however. I kind of have carte blanche to write whatever topics I want. And when before I became a columnist, I just love telling stories. I think everybody has a story, and it's something I tell my students all the time. And so, I think like probably most sports writers who are around my age, I subscribed to Sports Illustrated, and I would get it every Thursday and just read it from cover to cover and just dream of, writing feature stories on athletes and going around the country and meeting their families and how did they become the people that they are that led them to, superstardom, Super Bowls, whatever the case was. I didn't quite have that experience entirely. And so I've always loved scene setting and storytelling. And when I first started at Yahoo about 6 years ago, it was primarily as like just an NFL blogger. I left the Boston Globe. I had been a New England Patriots beat writer for almost a decade, but I had my two younger daughters very close together, and I just didn't want the 24/7, almost 365 demands of being a beat writer anymore when I had these two little babies. They're only 17 months apart. So after I had my youngest daughter, the opportunity to join Yahoo as a blogger came up, and it was a significant pay cut, but it meant that I could be home with my daughters. And so that was mostly blogging, but I could write columns here and there if I wanted to. And at the risk of sounding, I don't know, maybe ridiculous, I feel like I've just kind of always had this voice. Now that I'm in it full time, and it's been almost 2 years since I became a columnist full time, my driving thing is I want to educate people, because I write about the intersection of race and gender mostly in sports, and still the NFL. But I want to educate people as best I can. And then also I just need to give a voice and take a stand for, I have my biological children are all girls. I have a son who's 30 now. Oh my God. That he came to live with us when he was 12. And, I'm raising Black children in this country, and I just need to use my platform to do whatever I can to make things better for them. and all the kids who look like them. So I just, it's hard some days. Don't ever read the comments under my columns. um, but I know in a way that I have to be fearless. And the longer I do this, the more I just know I have to be fearless, because literally when I emailed and said, "Hey, I want to try this." There's at the time there was not another Black female sports columnist in the country. Jamel Hill was at the Atlantic, but she writes maybe once a month or so. Um, and I am only the fourth Black woman, as far as I know, to ever be a sports columnist in this country. Jamel was the first. Shannon Owens, actually, right when Jamel left the Orlando Sentinel, Shannon Owens followed her. Kimberly Martin, who is now at ESPN, was one very briefly with the Buffalo News, and then there was me. And as of about 6 weeks ago, Candace Buckner was named columnist at the Washington Post. And this is the first time there's ever been two Black women at the same time who are sports columnists, which is ridiculous. But I also internalize a lot of it, that I feel like I have to succeed, because if I don't, it might make it that much harder for a young Black woman who wants to be a columnist someday. So I know I have to be fearless. I know that, what I'm doing and the things that I'm writing are right. I usually gauge by the comments that I get. If I post something that I use every Twitter filter known to man. So if I see that there are a lot of Twitter responses, but I'll see the number, but I don't have to see many of them, then I know I've struck a nerve. And some days it's bad and I get down on myself, but then other days I know that I must have written something that I held up the mirror and they don't like what they see, which means I did something good. So yeah, I mean, it's just mostly women and, kids of color. They need a voice, and like you said, that people try to pretend that sports is apolitical, and that's just not at all the case. It never has been the case, and to pretend otherwise is ridiculous. It's just it's just
Right.
not possible.
Right. Definitely. And I definitely say I enjoyed your last piece that you wrote, talking about more of it wasn't justice, it was accountability.
Mhm.
Ahmaud Arbery, in the case of the McMichaels, I'm sorry, the McMichael
Exactly.
murder trial, not the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial, because people got to stop saying that, because
Mhm.
he's not on trial. The
He was
McMichael's
not
not.
on trial. I mean, the defense tried to put him on trial.
Right.
I literally got nauseous when I saw that clip of the defense attorney who said his long, dirty toenails. Like,
Yeah.
some
Ugh.
things are never gonna die. So
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, that one, it was interesting because I received this long email from a gentleman, who was like, "Well, that wasn't about sports," and I'm like, "Well, no, but like the beautiful thing is, for me personally, is that for the first time in my career, and I'm 44 now, so for the first time in my career, I really feel valued. Um, Especially my experience at the Boston Globe was, I did not feel that way at all. So on the heels of that, my voice is valued. And so if I go to, they might say to me, "Hey, can you write on XYZ?" I still have to be present on Sundays during the NFL season. And sometimes I take a big picture thing. Sometimes I will just take a specific game and write on it, whatever. But like I said, I can write about what I want. And really the only sports tied to Ahmaud Arbery was that he was on a jog when he was killed.
Right.
But some things are bigger than that. And,
Right.
they value the contributions that I make to the site. And so, it was such a weird email. and then I sucked it up and emailed the man back, and he has had no response. So it'll be
kind of expected, right?
it was just such a straight, like, he was like, well, he actually, I almost didn't, because he said he thought the Rittenhouse verdict was correct. And I was like, okay. And I almost didn't email him back, but I tried to be blunt, but as nicely as I could be.
Gotcha. You kind of went the Michelet route, nicety.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Now, I will say that definitely, of course, I do want to delve back into your past.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I do want to talk a little bit about the Boston Globe. I know you said you didn't necessarily feel valued there, but I do kind of value some of the things that you actually got to probably experience with, the New England Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, it had to be interesting covering that team, especially, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick. What was the feeling like covering Brady, Belichick, and the Patriots? And was it, something? What was something that kind of no one would think about regarding that team?
So I started covering them full time in 2006, and I left during the 2015 preseason because I was literally 39. I was like 3 days away from giving birth to my youngest daughter. It's the thing that people, I think, misconstrue about Belichick, and he's not really my favorite person on a personal level, but he, as long as you were doing your job, then he didn't much, because people talk about, oh, they can't talk to the media and everything's so closed mouth. And that is true to a point. But if you're doing your job, that's what matters most to him. And the thing that's funny, and I guess people have seen the clip, like, you'd almost be surprised the people that he really likes. Like, you see Bill Belichick and you see a guy like Randy Moss. Bill loves Randy Moss. He just, but it's in large part because Randy, from a football perspective, is brilliant. He just understood the concepts, understood what they were supposed to be doing, because the Patriots offense is a timing offense. And especially by the time Randy got there, it was 2007. And so Tom had been the starter for, 6 years. And he wanted you, if he said run 6 yards, cut to the sideline and the ball will be there. Don't go 5.5. Don't go 7. You must go 6 yards. And if you round it or any, Brady just wouldn't throw it to you. So, it's a very precise in that way. So you see, like, Bill really liked Randy. He really liked Chad Ochocinco. That did not work out because Chad was not a very good route runner and could not understand that. And I also think Chad was in his own head about the Patriot way, and he thought he had to be a certain thing, and he stopped being himself. And I think that messed with him a little bit too. But they have, it was interesting. It was really interesting. I did not see a lot of the friction between Bill and Brady that, now, since he left, we've heard a lot about. But yeah, it was interesting. It was an interesting time. I will always be grateful, because I have no desire to go back to being an NFL beat writer. But I will always be grateful that, my almost 10 years was covering the greatest quarterback of all time. And I do think by and large, he's a good guy, which is also something that I will be grateful for, because, as you know, if you've been in a locker room, sometimes you find out things that you don't want to find out. And everybody wants to hear, oh, it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and Tom Brady's the greatest guy. And I can tell people honestly that I do think Brady is a good guy. So.
Mm-hmm. Got you. Yeah, and of course, speaking of the Patriots, there's quite a few connections to the Patriots in the AFC South, which is a division we talk about a lot on this show. Let's start with the most prominent connection, which is the Titans and head coach Mike Vrabel. Of course, he just came back home and played against Belichick, and of course, they got beat down 36-13. Looking at where they are and the injuries they have had to overcome, I think they're going to set the record for most active players on that roster in the NFL history this year. And they're still fighting for the best record in the AFC. Do you think he is a front runner for Coach of the Year?
Vrabel?
Yes.
I don't know about front runner. To be honest with you, I think at this point, Belichick should be in the conversation for sure. Mostly because of the rookie quarterback. And they're now, I think if the playoffs started today, the Patriots would be the 2 seed, right?
They'd be in there.
Yeah. And I think LaFleur in Green Bay also. Mike it's interesting to see Mike as a head coach. I think he's one of those coaches who actually is better as a head coach. You know, there's a few guys like Wade Phillips, much better as a coordinator than as a head coach, right? And the same thing with like Norv Turner. But Vrabel, I knew somebody who used to be in the Texans organization when he was with the Texans, and he was like, he is not a very good defensive coordinator. And they were stunned when he was hired as a head coach. But I think Mike has that thing, you know, that makes a good head coach. And I think he also he's chosen well with his coordinators, as we've seen, because a couple of them have gone on to become head coaches. So I think this season is so weird. Just
That's true.
in the AFC South and in the league overall, that those kinds of awards, they're just not going to be figured out until the last week or so of the regular season. I mean, look at 5 weeks into the season, we were saying, you know, was Josh Allen or whomever going to be MVP? And now it's like, well, it might be Aaron Rodgers, and it might be Aaron Rodgers by default. And, you know, early in the season, the receiver for the Bengals looked like he would be offensive rookie of the year, but now Mac Jones kind of looks like offensive rookie of the year, and no team really wants to pull away. So I think all of those awards this year will be really close. And they just, I'm not sure. I'm not an Associated Press voter. I don't know when the ballots are due, but I don't envy them this year. It seems like it's going to be even harder than it normally is to make some of these major award decisions.
Right, it definitely is. I mean, I'm looking at it now, and I'm like, wow. You know, I couldn't pick. It'd be hard to pick an MVP right now. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, like I said, Rodgers misses that one game, and then you see, oh God, they're terrible without him offensively. So it almost bolsters his argument. But then you have a guy like Tom Brady, even though against the Colts on Sunday, he did not have a lights out kind of game. But he's in the discussion too. So I'm trying to think of who else.
You got Jonathan Taylor's in the same game.
Yeah, Taylor was, and he was quiet until late in the second half against the Buccaneers.
Right. You got your Aaron Rodgers, you've got your Lamar Jacksons.
Russell Wilson looked pretty good before he got hurt, and now he's looked terrible.
Yeah.
So you did. It's Josh Allen. I don't know what talk about regression. He had that great season last year, and then a couple weeks ago they lost 9-6 to the Jaguars. I mean,
yes.
Come on, that was just terrible. And you know, people expected Baker Mayfield to take another step forward, and you know, they play injured, and we're all supposed to admire his toughness. But you know, if you're not like great, if you're hurt and you can play and it won't really negatively impact your game, that's one thing. but clearly it's impacting his ability to play, and that can't be helpful to your team. You're supposed to be taking that next step forward. And then, the injuries, like you said, with the Titans and all of the guys that they have, Henry going down, and hopefully he's ready for the postseason. But
Got
it's
Julio, and you got
Julio,
AJ
yeah, I'm
Brown
sure they
too.
had great expectations when they got him. So,
Mhm.
and it's all over. I mean, 3 weeks, 4 weeks into the season, everybody was like, "Oh my God, Matthew Stafford," and now it's like, nope, Matthew Stafford is who we thought he was. Like, we
Right,
cannot completely blame Detroit. It cannot just be Detroit. It has to be. There's a little bit of Matthew Stafford happening there.
right, right. Now, of course, I did want to mention, of course, without the injuries, and you've got AJ Brown and Julio Jones, which they will be back before the season's over, and there's a good chance Henry makes it back for the playoffs. Do you have any? Do you have imaginations that the Titans could potentially make a run, that magical run to the Super Bowl potentially?
I mean, as we sit here right now, I don't remember who I picked. I
What's
think I
that?
picked I'm trying to think who I picked because, Yahoo makes us do preseason
Mm-hmm.
picks. I think I picked the Bucks from the NFC, but I can't
Mm-hmm.
remember who I chose for the AFC. It's this season is so it's just so strange. And as we sit here right now, amazingly enough, here come the Patriots creeping into the picture.
Right.
Like the fans of the 31 other teams were like, yes, we got a couple of years where we have a chance. And nope, here we are. They've won 6 straight games. They're 8-4. They're a half a game out of first place in the AFC. It's bananas, So I normally and I usually stick with my preseason predictions, and I'll have to look up who my AFC pick was because I actually think I chose the AFC. Did I say Chiefs? I might have picked a rematch of last year, but a flipped result. I might have said Chiefs Bucks, and that the Chiefs would win this time. And even them, they're starting to show some signs of life, and that the defense is not a complete and utter train wreck. This season is really incredible. It's
Very
as soon
much.
as you think this is the team. Like we talked about the Rams early on the season, it was, oh my God, Matthew Stafford, he's an MVP candidate. And here we are a few games later, and Sean McVay looks completely like he's overrated. That boy genius tag is really starting to fall off of him. And Stafford's not playing great. His wife is throwing pretzels at people in the stands.
Oh boy.
The fathers of all of the skill position players at the Browns are on Facebook and Instagram talking crap about Baker. From a soap opera standpoint, it's an incredibly entertaining season. But there's just not one, like I could say today, okay, I think it's going to be the Patriots, Patriots Titans in the AFC Championship game, and then we could talk again in 3 weeks and I might say, oh, no, it's going to be,
Right.
Chargers, Bills, or whatever it is.
Right.
It's, I'm sure the league loves it.
Yeah, definitely all the parody.
Yes.
One thing I also want to ask about is, of course, the other team that has a lot of connections with the Patriots, which is the Texans. Ironically, the Texans. Looking at their team, I mean, of course, they struggle. They're struggling this year. Of course, they lost to the Jets Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see any light at the end of the tunnel for that mess that's going on down there?
Not as long as Jack Easterby runs pretty much everything. No, nope.
Gotcha.
It's not. Yeah, Cal McNair handed the keys to the franchise to, a team chaplain, and
Right.
doesn't understand why that's a bad thing. I mean, Bill Belichick, I've heard him talk trash like maybe once or twice. And he's been asked, like, oh, did you ever envision Jack Easterby in this kind of role? And he's like, no, Jack has no personnel knowledge. And here we are. I don't know, like, is Jack like, does Nick Caserio report to Jack Easterby? You know, you've been drooling to get Nick Caserio away from the Patriots for years and years, and he finally comes, and now, you know, the team chaplain. I don't mean to, because I've written about Jack Easterby before, and I'm not trying to minimize the role of the team chaplain, but the team chaplain has a very specific role. When Jack Easterby was with the Patriots, and before he was with the Patriots, he had been the Kansas City Chiefs team chaplain. And my understanding is he wasn't even paid by the Chiefs. It was kind of like a volunteer-ish sort of thing. You know, he was not a full-time employee of the Kansas City Chiefs. He came on when they had that tragedy, the player who killed his girlfriend and then himself, and he started helping the team then. And then the Patriots brought him in after the Aaron Hernandez situation. And he sort of came in as a chaplain / character coach sort of thing. But he has no personnel experience whatsoever. You know, this is a man who would pray with the players, and he might have Bible study with players and their significant others. He has no personnel experience whatsoever. And you have this franchise you've inherited from your dad, this multi-billion-dollar business, and you've handed it over to a man whose resume is like as thin as tissue paper, and he has no discernible personnel experience whatsoever. And it's just, you know, for a lot of different reasons, it's mind-boggling. You know, if you are a longtime Texans front office guy, you're mad because here you've been grinding away, trying to climb the ladder. Particularly, you know, we go through this every year. If you're a Black front office executive who's trying so hard to make it to the GM level or the team president level, or, you know, just beyond being a scout or a regional scout, here's this guy just comes in and is ostensibly running an NFL franchise. And it's crazy. And the other thing about the Texans, I feel so bad for Tyrod Taylor. That kid has the worst luck in the history of the NFL. Last year, he starts the season. Yes, I know he knew he was basically keeping the seat warm for Justin Herbert with the Chargers, but gets hurt in the first game. They give him a painkiller and they punctured one of his lungs. Like he was the starter the season that the Browns drafted Baker. Gets hurt midway through the season and Baker takes over, and that's the end of that. It's like this guy and from all accounts, he's like the nicest guy you could ever have. And I'm not saying he would be, you know, the second coming of Aaron Rodgers, but you know, it just and he just keeps getting stuck with these terrible franchises too. Like now he's with the Texans. What they did with David Culley's coached his whole entire life, finally gets a chance to be a head coach, and it's with a dumpster fire. But if you're him, do you say no? Right? It's just such a terrible position to be in. You know, you're 60-something years old. You've coached your whole entire life. There's only 32 of these jobs on the whole entire planet. And now he's stuck with, you know, a charlatan runs the organization. Nick Caserio is, I guess, technically the GM. The starting quarterback, who's supposed to be the starting quarterback, doesn't want to be there and has been accused of over 20 women of sexual impropriety. Like, oh my God. Like
a lot going on.
Take the money, David Culley, and take care of your children and grandchildren, and just take as much money as you can and go. I again, like I said, there's only 32 of those jobs. I understand why he would take it, but man, what a terrible position to be put in.
Definitely. And another guy that's actually there in Houston is a former Patriot, and Brandon Cooks. Now, he's actually put up some numbers, and he's for fantasy people, he's done great. Mm-hmm. But of course, that hadn't translated any wins. Do you see him having maybe an effect like a guy that like a Steve Smith, perhaps a smallish receiver that can be a number one and potentially, I guess, grow with that team, since he said he doesn't want to be traded anymore since when he got there?
Yeah, Cooks that's an interesting. He's on what, his 5th or 6th team now?
Let's see. It was the Saints, the Patriots, the Rams, and I think this is his fourth team. I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because usually when you see a guy on more than two or three, when you see a guy on that many teams in a short amount of time, you usually hear him called like a cancer, or he's not a good locker room guy, or whatever the case may be. And it doesn't seem like that's the thing with Cooks. I feel like he probably has potential to be a number one, but when you bounce around that much, you're learning different playbooks. You're playing with so many different quarterbacks. They all have different expectations and things they're asking of you. So he's, I think he's making the best of a bad situation, but do we know who their quarterback is going to be next year? I mean, Terod's already been hurt this year. It came back, obviously, but I think he has the goods, and I know that the Patriots liked him, but they got a first from the Rams to get him. So Belichick's never going to turn down a first round pick.
Right. He definitely. We'll get them when he can.
Oh yeah, nobody. I don't know the raw numbers, but I'd be surprised if there's two franchises that trade more than him when it comes to draft picks.
Definitely. He definitely does. Of course, we do have two other teams to kind of mention in this division. One that both of them really don't have connections with the Patriots, of course. Mm-hmm. But the first one I want to talk about is, of course, the Indianapolis Colts. They have Carson Wentz there. But they also have a guy named Jonathan Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he has been playing some great football this year. I mean, besides Derrick Henry, he's been the running back everyone's talking about. Now, do you think what Taylor has done, right now to this point has put him squarely in the MVP race?
I think so. Like we talked about before, there's so many people that we can make that distinction or put on the list. It's not usually by this point in the season, there might be like three people that we're talking about as the top contenders, but we're probably at like 5 or 6 or 7 as we sit here right now. Taylor's been great for them. I think especially for Wentz. I think we know who he is now at this point. He's not. I think Wentz is one of those guys you don't want him to lose games for you. I don't know how many games he's necessarily going to win for you anymore, right. But you don't want him to just lose games. And their defense is good in Indianapolis. So, get 21, 24 points, and the defense is probably going to hold, the opposition, under that, and they'll be fine. So, and the other thing about a run game that I think you can't overlook is it just eats clock. Time of possession is so important. We saw it on Sunday when they played the Patriots. I'm sorry, when they played the Buccaneers. I was thinking of Brady. They didn't really get Taylor involved until later in the game. And Brady ended up having a good amount of time to work with to try to get those last points on the board that they needed. So, I think I still think balance is it. This league, we've seen it go so much to become a passing league over the last few years, but I still think you need that offensive balance. And like I said, I think you really need a run game for two reasons. One, because any offensive lineman will tell you they much prefer run blocking to pass blocking. So you want to keep those guys, not exhaust them. But then also because a run game helps you eat clock. So yeah, I do think he's definitely been one of the surprises of the season.
Right. Now, of course, we did mention Mr. Carson Wentz. He has been careful with the football this season. I will say he has not played as much hero ball as we saw in Philadelphia. But do you feel in the playoffs, should the Colts make it, which right now they currently are outside the playoff picture? Do you think he can continue to value the football and actually make plays to help them win games?
He's such a strange player. There was a beautiful long ball that he had on Sunday against Tampa Bay And so you just see flashes of it. Like you see that there's certainly something there. But then I think it's like you said, he either tries too hard or he just makes the wrong decision. And obviously, one of the biggest things that I learned from Belichick is that decision making is it, for quarterbacks. Good decision making is probably the most important thing. And so there's a couple of passes that he has, and you're just like, where were you going with that? I think there was one of the picks, he did have two picks against the Buccaneers, and one of them he just threw it like directly to a defensive line. No, wait, I'm confusing games. That was Daniel Jones. I'm confusing games. But
They do look similar in some aspects sometimes.
yeah, he just that's the thing. I know going with Reich was supposed to be a good thing for him. And I do think he's certainly not the train wreck that he was his last season in Philadelphia. But we also haven't seen it. We have to remember that the year that the last time the Eagles went to the Super Bowl and they ended up winning, it wasn't Carson who got them all the way to that point. So we don't even really know what can he handle and what can he do in that pressure, the really pressurized situation. I think, they have good parts. I think their defense is very strong. We've talked about Taylor. So they have a good core. And I do think, quiet as kept, some of my colleagues and they were discussing this on Sunday. Frank Reich doesn't get a lot of credit, but I think he might be one of the best coaches in the NFL. I think he has that thing, and I think his players love him. He's smart, and he does a good job. So all of the ingredients are there. And like I said, I think Carson, you just don't want him to make that one stupid decision that loses the game for you. Just protect the ball, keep Taylor in it, eat time off the clock, and go with it that way. Count on your defense to make a play when it's needed.
Right. Now, of course, the last team and the final team in this division we have to talk about is the Jacksonville Jaguars. And of course, I have to ask, what was your initial reaction when it was announced that Urban Meyer was going to be the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars?
I actually wrote a column about that because I felt away. I just, it was, I think he was hired a little bit later in the process, I think. And so, they had brought in Eric Bieniemy. They had brought in, I'm trying to think who else. They overlooked Bieniemy, and then it came out that Shad Khan had basically offered Urban, he had been courting him for weeks. And so interviewing Bieniemy and the other, I think Saleh, they interviewed, that was all just window dressing. And so I was frustrated by that once again, the Rooney Rule was just flouted, and mocked for the farce that it is. I do not understand. Like, were it me and I was drafting the number 1 overall pick, and this year it was supposed to be surefire, can't miss, great quarterback, why would I not hire the guy who's been working with Patrick Mahomes the last few years? Why would I not do that?
You make a great point.
Right? And then there's the whole Urban Meyer off the field stuff that he knew that Zach Smith, he knew that Zach Smith was beating his wife, protected him, and promoted him. The many other scandals that he has had, and Shad Khan looked at him and was like, "Yep, you come here, you come save my franchise, or you come." I don't know if Jacksonville can be saved at this point, but it just, all of it, it was, of all of the coaches, and plus Urban, at the first sign of distress, usually bolts. So this Jacksonville, as it always seems to be, it was a heavy lifting job. And Urban Meyer is not exactly heavy lifting to me. And plus, it's the NFL. We've seen so many hotshot college coaches who have had some level of success in college game. They come to the NFL and they're like, oh, wait, I can't just hoard, 5-star recruits and do whatever I want. And then, of course, no sooner do they sign him, they're getting slapped with a fine because they violated the CBA during their OTA program. And then there's the video of him not flying home with his team. Oh, I wanted to stay behind and blow off a little steam. That was like 4 games into the season. And then the whole foolishness about waiting until days before the regular season opener to be like, oh yeah, Trevor Lawrence is the starter. Like, that franchise is desperate for buzz. You have the number 1 overall pick. The kid's supposed to be can't miss. You should have from day one been like, this is our starter. He should have been billboards all over the place. He should have been in every advertising campaign you had for months. And instead you tried to play some game that, oh, he might not be the starter. Come on. There's been so much other drama and craziness that's happened in the NFL this year that we've kind of forgotten about the Jaguars and Urban Meyer. But yeah, as I say very often, just because people have a lot of money does not mean they have a lot of smarts.
This is true. True. Now, finally, in your introduction, of course, we talked about the intersectionality of your work. With the NFL, where do you think it personally stands with the intersectionality within the brand, and what can be done to make it grow even more?
Oh God. I have very, very conflicted feelings about the NFL. I've written a lot about the situation with Washington football and how Roger Goodell and the NFL owners are protecting Daniel Snyder. It disgusts me beyond belief that not only will they not produce a report on the findings, but they intentionally told the law firm not to produce, like, don't do a written summary of what you found. And the only person who has suffered any real consequence is John Gruden. It just, the league, and that's just the most recent example. I don't understand why Deshaun Watson is not on the commissioner's exempt list, which is basically paid vacation. I don't, the brand is going to grow. They've signed a new round of television deals. There's more billions to add to the pie. And I know that until, if it ever happens, until 1 or 2 of their major advertisers step up and be like, look, we're not paying any more money to support this. You turn a blind eye to domestic violence. You sided with an owner. I mean, not even the Snyder thing, as you can tell. It really, for as much as this league has frustrated me over the last several years, this Dan Snyder thing is just beyond, especially because they care so much about optics and the optics of letting this, not just, he has had no major punishment. You find the organization. Okay, you find the organization. For some undetermined amount of time, his wife is in charge. But yet, even Ron Rivera has been on radio in the DC area and said, oh yeah, I talk to Dan Snyder a couple times a week. Well, then what is it? His wife goes on a podcast and is whining about how aggrieved she is through all of this and how bad it's been for her children through all of this. What about the dozens of women, 44 women that we know of, who stepped forward and said, this happened to me.
Right.
But in the 650,000 emails that have come out, the only person who's actually gotten in trouble is John Gruden, who should have been fired. He should have been fired. But, Bruce Allen, which I guess he won't be hired again by another team, but it just, and they just keep rolling forward, rolling through it. Like we talked about, they are probably loving it this season. You might get them to get emails all the time from ESPN or from the league, and oh, look at these ratings numbers. And, they got rid of Colin Kaepernick, and now we're a couple years past that, and they paint end racism on the end of the field, and every once in a while sing Lift Every Voice and Sing, and that's supposed to make everything all better. It's really hard for me. Like, when I covered the Patriots, there were players that I became friendly with, and pretty much every player that I came across, good guys. They're good guys. I love the game itself. I love the game of football, but it's hard sometimes to be at a place like Yahoo with the reach and the platform, the large platform that it is, and keep writing about this league that I know as a Black woman that they don't care about me and, in general, as a person. They don't really care about women. We've seen that time and time and time again. Going back to Ray Rice, going back to Greg Hardy, Adrian Peterson briefly had a job with the Titans, and we all know it. We know what Adrian Peterson was accused of. So, and then, the race norming, that's kind of, I wrote about it and it got some attention, but it doesn't seem like people are as angry about it as they should be, or it's gotten as much attention as it should, that you sat there and said, well, Black people aren't that smart anyway, so who cares if you lose some brain function from concussions and playing football? It's
definitely a love-hate relationship.
It is. It really is. I will sit down and I'll see plays, and some Sundays I watch just a game. Some Sundays I watch Red Zone. And, you certainly appreciate and are awed by some of the things that these men can do as athletes, and things like that. But then the league itself, I mean, it could be swallowed up tomorrow, and I don't know that I'd miss it necessarily.
I hear you.
It's tough. It really is tough. And like I said, until, if that day happens that Nike and Budweiser and Verizon step forward and say, our money is going to stop unless you produce a report on what happened in Washington, or you start taking these things more seriously, it's not going to change, because the money's still rolling in, and that's the unfortunate truth.
Right. I hear you. Yeah, it's definitely a love-hate relationship, that's for sure. I want to thank you for coming on. I mean, you are walking, living, breathing history.
Oh, thank you. And sometimes I get frustrated that, like, I'm not frustrated, but yes, I'm that old. But it's yeah, it's a thing. I've been one of the surprises of my lifetime. I also teach at Emerson College here in Boston. And last year I received an email from one of the students and said, oh, we want to make a documentary about your life. And I was like, I literally, I promise you, I looked to see that it was like a real email address and not that I was being punked. And so through working with those young men, and thinking about my career and stuff like that, I've gotten so much more proud. Like, I never set out to do, and like, I just knew when I was 16 years old that I wanted to be a sports writer. And I grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and never thought like that there was really nobody that looked like me that was a sports writer. I had seen Robin Roberts on Sports Center,
Mhm.
but were it not for um, two men at the Providence Journal, which is where I got my start, the newspaper in Providence, Rhode Island. If it were not for those two men who just from day one were like, "Oh, you want to be a sports writer? Come on, let's help you be a sports writer." Had they, doubted me at any point, I have no idea what would have happened. And even one of the very first stories that I did, um, I was sent to Brown University in Providence because some wealthy alum had endowed the football coaching chair. And the man who was the athletic director at the time, he answered my questions and he was kind of, curt. He wasn't great. And then at the end, he was like, well, why aren't you writing about women's sports? What are you doing here? And he was like so rude to me. And I went back and I told my sports editor, and he was like, if you want to cover women's sports, you can cover women's sports, but you want to be a sports writer, not a women's sports writer. And he never did anything but uplift and support me. Um, and the lead columnist at the time, a man named Bill Reynolds, was the same way, and if it were not for them supporting me, because we hear so much about, especially young people of color who try to get into this business, and they're just so often met with, roadblocks and not supported, and they end up leaving the business. And so like I said, through that project, I've had a lot of time to reflect and needed to reflect, and been just so grateful for the people who have supported me. And my husband too. My husband and I have been together for almost 25 years. We met at Syracuse.
Mhm.
Um, and he,
So that's what it is. You went to
yeah, I
Syracuse.
did go to Syracuse.
Ah, that's
But
where everybody seems to go.
We churn out the best, Bob Costas and Kevin Cooper, who used to run the PR department at the Houston Texans, somebody else who's always been in my corner.
Mhm.
But yeah, my husband, he encourages me to do some of you want to be a beat writer? Okay, we'll figure it out. We're going to have kids and you're going to be a beat writer. Okay, we'll get it done, And
Mhm.
so, and he's the one who was like, yeah, you should be a columnist. Go for it. So yeah, it's
That's awesome. That's
we're
that's
not done yet, but it's been pretty amazing so far. And I'm going to the Super Bowl this year, and I'll be in the building, and it'll be the 8th one that I'm in the building for. And so for a little girl who was raised in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which is like a nothing little old mill city in New England, it's pretty amazing.
definitely sounds like you've had a whirlwind of a career. Now, for those that aren't aware or not, wanting to reach out to you, can you give them where they can reach out to you, and then also where they can find your work as well?
Yeah, my Twitter is Shalise M. Young. So you can see the spelling of my name there, Shalise M. Young on Twitter. Um, I have an author page on Yahoo. If you go to like
I've been
sports,
there.
yeah, if you go to like sports.yahoo.com, if I've written something, I'm usually on the main page with
Mhm.
my little picture. Um, but I do have an author page. So yeah,
Gotcha.
that's generally what I'm up to. I'm on Twitter. Um,
You do read folks every now and then. I
I
think
I
you do read some folks every now
sometimes I can't help myself.
and then.
I tell I think the last time I really dug into somebody, a friend of mine texted and he's like, that person, they only have like 15 followers. I was like, I know, but I had time today. We had to go there. So yeah,
I
I
definitely.
try. I try. I've started taking a lot more time off of Twitter. Um, it's mostly because of the state of the country. Uh,
Mhm.
so a lot of it is not the best to process. So I try to take more time off, and that helps too. But
Mhm.
like I said, I have 3 daughters, one of whom we know is queer, and so I just need to be a voice for them. And if I convince just a couple of people, to that what I'm they read me and they understand me and they process and they think and reflect and whatever it might be. If I can do that for one person, a column or whatever, then I'm doing something.
Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on. It's been a pleasure. And for those that are watching you or listening, you've been touring the AFC South with your host, Mike Patton. We're out.